you so much, Joseph, for coming on today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So, thank you again for explaining to me a little bit before the recording a little bit more detail about the film. So, whenever you received this script of this film, what about it made you want to take part in helping to execute the story?
Well, it's funny because originally when Turlik presented this to me, I had met Turlik because I applied for a role that he was working on. He was working on a film about some medieval knights or something like that, and he was gonna, make a whole suit of armor for me or whatever. And that never panned out. So he sent me this script and he said, "Hey, would you mind playing this minor role of this Father Constantini?" And I had just barely started getting back into acting, so I was very impressed with the professionalism in the script, and I was very much impressed with his professionalism, and obviously being given the opportunity to act alongside Nigel Mercier, who's an established, well-known actor in Ireland who has 30 years experience, who runs an acting school in Limerick, and he's a very, very, very talented actor. There was hardly any way I was going to pass that up. So went down to Limerick and shot a few scenes, and everything seemed fine. Later on, there was some problems with the files, and some of them were lost. So we had to either jettison the whole project or reshoot it. And in between that time, we had developed a lot of very good relationships with a bunch of other filmmakers who they were specialized in their areas, like sound and lighting and camera and everything. And we sort of decided to revive the project and do a few reshoots, and even modified the script a little bit because we had the opportunity in order to develop the story a little bit more versus what we had before. So it was kind of it was almost an orphan child. It was almost one of those projects that never was completed, and it became a completed project through a lot of really hard work, and we pushed really hard to get it done. It comes down to the testament of every single cast and crew member who we spent. This was during the summer in Ireland, where you literally only get maybe about 4.5 hours of night, if you're lucky. And we had to shoot all these at night. So because we had so many hours of footage that we had to retrieve several different locations, that posed a bit of a challenge. Everybody had to essentially not sleep for a week. And the dedication of everybody was just amazing. So we were very, very lucky to have just incredible crew and cast that were willing to go through the pain of and suffering for it. It was just amazing. Like the house that we shot in, it was sort of it was a place where what do you call those people that collect trash and newspapers and they just pile it up in there? I forgot
Collector?
what's that?
A collector?
No, it's, I guess a collector would be a nice way to put it. But the house was just covered in piles and piles of newspapers and
Oh,
everything. And
Ford?
hoarder, there you go.
Porter.
And the actors, the crew, everybody jumped in to clear the rooms that were used in the shots, and it took hours to do. And the place was a mess, and they had to clean it. They had to scrub to get it clean in order to make things look halfway decent. But yeah, it was really tough. It was hard work, and everybody pulled through. So it was just a fantastic cast and crew, and that's the bottom line.
So that's interesting because in the movie, it felt like Nigel's character lived at the church, but the house was a different location than the church.
Yeah, yeah. So the in Catholic communities in parishes, you'll have a church, and then you'll have a priest's home that's usually right next to the church, or it may be down a path somewhere. So it's we're sort of following that tradition. He's the head priest of that church, but he lives at the priest's residence with the other priests. So the two priests live together in a house that is separate from the church itself, which is why he traverses back to the church from the house at a certain stage. And also when he runs from the church, he's running back to the house.
Okay. And then when Nigel's character is get the other priest, that other priest doesn't live in the church either.
Yeah, no, they both live in the same house, so that's
Okay.
very common practice here.
Okay. So how were the filmmakers of the movie able to transition it in a way to make it feel like it was all happening in the same place?
A lot of stuff had to be cut out of the edit because it was already 18 minutes long, which was it's too long for a short film. You really want to get it down under 15 minutes. The sweet spots in between 10 and 12. Um, Luckily for us, the 18 minutes doesn't feel like 18 minutes, which is that's one of the pieces of feedback we got from just about everybody, that it doesn't actually feel like 18 minutes. They feel like they, yeah. So the transition, the way that we used the two areas, one of the church that we filmed in was in Galway. Um, Portions of it we filmed in a cathedral in Limerick, but very few portions of it, and that was the leftover footage that we had from the previous shoot. Um, for the transition between the two places, we wanted it to appear like the church is old and the house is old, and therefore it's probably tucked away in a hills area with a lot of trees and what have you. So the scenes between the two locations we shot in a small wooded area in just outside of Galway, where there's just a muddy path in between a bunch of trees. So we wanted to give the appearance that when he travels from the church to the house, that he has to take this sort of unmarked path to give that old feel towards it. Um, but yeah, I mean the other location was a place near Scariff. It was a house near Scariff, a really old house that it was a manor house that was just left unattended for years, which was perfect for how we wanted to create the atmosphere.
The flashback with the scene on the highway, whenever it's implied that Nigel has a weakness, which makes him vulnerable later on in the story. Where'd you film the highway scene?
I believe that that was taken from, if I'm correct, and this is where we would need Turlick because he did do the editing on this one. Now I wasn't there when they shot that, so my assumption is that it was a flash of footage that he had from something else
Okay.
that he thought would fit in that scene, rather than have a full-on collision, which would have turned this into from a low budget to a bigger budget. So yeah, it would have just been some sort of clip that he had from a previous shoot or something that he put in there to indicate there was some sort of traffic.
Were you involved in the editing process of the movie at all?
The only involvement I had was when Turlock gave me the rough cuts, and I would go through and make a few notes here and there where I thought some things could be cut, trimmed, et cetera, et cetera. But it was just notes. And of course, he, as um, the editor, the writer, the director, he sort of had more uh, pull in a lot of cases.
Right.
So a few of my notes did get in there, but not all of them. But so that's probably the only amount of pull I had at all in the editing process, really.
Did you think the overall, after the editing and the trimming down and modifying the script, that the story got better? Or
I definitely think that it moved a lot better after some of the trims and cuts that were made. There were a few scenes that I thought were a bit problematic and distracting, and they were hard to make the decision to request that they get cut. And when I did ask Turlock to cut them, he totally agreed. When we looked at it together, uh, they they were hard to cut because it was a major scene in the very beginning of the film. But after we saw it put together in a rough cut, we just thought it was way too distracting and might pull the viewer instantly out of that tense, sort of eerie atmosphere. So yeah, it was hard. That was, for lack of a better phrase, that was one of the babies we had to kill. Um, but other than that, like it was just, the rest of it was just tightening it up in places, and making sure that we kept the pacing up and avoid those long lulls for no purpose. But and I think overall, when we were finished with all of those special trims and cuts, that what we had was something that was very well paced. And that's, I'm not just saying that just because you know I worked on the film, but with Turlick and the crew, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that because that's the feedback that we received from a lot of people who've seen it. They thought that the pacing was one of the best things it had going for it.
the major scene at the beginning that you had to cut out, what would it have been? I'm just curious.
It was a sex scene. I'm just kidding.
Oh, okay, I was about to say, I understand.
No, I'm just joking.
That would have been different.
Yeah, that would have been a little distracting. No,
Yeah.
um, no, it was a first introduction to the other priest, and he would have been cleaning up after mass, and the altar boy would have been cleaning up with him, and he was just short tempered with the altar boy and started screaming at him, and the whole event gets interrupted by Nigel Mercier's character, who stops him from doing what he's doing, has the kid go home, and then he starts looking into, when he's putting his stole away, he sees the picture of his family after all that calms down. So initially the idea seemed okay, but when we looked at the rough cut, we thought that it made the other priest look terrible, so the viewers would not like him, and therefore the interaction that they had when they went back to the house wouldn't work properly. And secondly, we thought that it flowed a lot better when it has the intro where Nigel's walking down and he locks the door to the church, and then he just ends up looking at the stole and he hears a mysterious knock on the door. We thought just going straight into that, just it flowed better and had better pacing and kept this real eerie dark tension up with no dialogue.
What was the hardest part of putting this film all together?
God, making it. The Like I said, it was a week long shoot, and everybody dedicated their time to it. It was incredible the amount of people that stayed on to make sure that this was finished. And we had quite a few people that worked, and they were all experts in their area. Um, that's that's the thing that kind of boggles my mind. Now, obviously, after that, then it's just up to editing and everything, and that takes time, and it's a grueling process. And Turlock, he not only wrote it and directed it, he also did the editing. And when you're doing all those things, it's kind of a difficult process. It wears on you after a while. I mean, if you edit anything, I would say that after you've watched it about 2 dozen times, you never want to see it ever again. And it makes it really difficult to just fine tune it because you're just so sick of it. You don't find any pleasure in it. And, so I imagine that a lot of that was going on. But definitely because of the impact it had on the larger cast and crew, definitely the hardest part was making it, especially having to reshoot. A lot of dedication, especially from Nigel Mercier, um, and Michael Irwin, to always they were always available for this. And we're talking about over the course of a couple of years traveling back and forth. um, so yeah, definitely making it was the biggest challenge.
Um, how were you able? You said Nigel Mercer's like a big known actor in Ireland. How were you able to get a well known actor to come on a smaller scale film?
Well, that was somebody that Turlock had met, and he Turlock is an idealist, and he presents it's strange in a way because he'll come up with ideas that seem probably a little bit ambitious, but he manages to get people to believe